What does the Feast of Unleavened Bread have to do with Abraham? Do Abraham and the Feast of Unleavened Bread relate in any way to God's only begotten Son? How does Solomon's temple correspond to any of this? Stick around to find out. As is the norm for the Book of Jubilees, we believers are gifted with yet another fascinating detail that the 66-volume Protestant Bible, unfortunately, doesn't contain. If you haven't already watched How to Celebrate Passover and Unleavened Bread, then I recommend that you do so afterwards, as this video will hopefully provide you with a little more appreciation for this particular feast. Allow me to set the stage. Jubilees 17:15-18 says, "And it came to pass in the 7th week, in the 1st year thereof, in the 1st month in this Jubilee, on the 12th of this month, there were voices in heaven regarding Abraham, that he was faithful in all that he told him, and that he loved the Lord, and that in every affliction he was faithful. And the prince Mastema came and said before God, Behold, Abraham loves Isaac his son, and he delights in him above all things else. Bid him to offer Isaac as a burnt offering on the altar. And you will see if he will do this command, and you will know if he is faithful in everything in which you do try him. And the Lord knew that Abraham was faithful in all of his afflictions, for he had tried him through his country and with famine, and had tried him with the wealth of kings, and had tried him again through his wife, when she was torn from him, and with circumcision, and had tried him through Ishmael and Hagar, his maidservant, when he sent them away. And in everything wherein he had tried him, he was found faithful, and his soul was not impatient, and he was not slow to act, for he was faithful and a lover of the Lord. In like manner to how he tried to accuse and trip up Job, Satan decided to approach the Most High with one of his crafty requests in hopes that Abraham would fall out of God's good graces and blessings. As most of us know, Abraham ends up passing yet another test of faith. However, this isn't what I want to highlight in this video. What I want to point out is the timing that these events took place. Satan, who is also called Mastema in the Book of Jubilees, Mastema meaning animosity or hostility, which are definitely a couple of Satan's traits, approached Yahweh on the 12th day of month number 1. Just as he accepted Satan's weak attempt to assassinate Job's godly character and heart in the Book of Job, Yahweh agrees to try Abraham in the manner that Satan had pitched to him, that being the sacrificing of his beloved son Isaac as a burnt offering on the altar. Genesis 22:1-4 says, Now it happened after these things, that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac, and go forth to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split wood for the burnt offering, and arose, and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place from a distance. The land that Abraham was to take his son Isaac to perform the sacrifice was called Moriah. Moriah has interesting prophetic implications that I'll get back to. What's really interesting is that Genesis 22 verses 1-4 picks up where Jubilees 17 verse 18 ends. All of a sudden it makes so much more sense as to why Yahweh even desired to test Abraham in this manner. It seems rather random without the context given in Jubilees. This conversation with Abraham was had on the same day that Satan approached God, on the 12th day of month 1. Then we are told that after Abraham was given the instruction to offer up his son, Abraham gets up early the next morning to start his journey to the land of Moriah. This puts the beginning of Abraham's journey on the 13th. Let's head back to Jubilees to read this same event. And God said to him, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here am I. And he said, Take your beloved son Isaac, whom you love, and go unto the high country, and offer him on one of the mountains which I will point out to you. And he rose early in the morning, and saddled his donkey, and took his 2 young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood of the burnt offering. And he went to the place on the 3rd day, and he saw the place afar off. So, both Genesis and Jubilees say that Abraham rose up early in the morning to start his journey, and both accounts record that Abraham saw the place where he was to perform the sacrifice, both revealing that he saw the location on the 3rd day. This latter detail is an important one, because it allows us to pinpoint when the sacrifice was supposed to take place on the calendar. As you can see, the 3-day countdown starts on the 13th, which is when Abraham had initially left. When Abraham saw the place, it was on the 3rd day from the time when he had left, which places his arrival on the 15th day of month number 1. One of the differences in detail between the Masoretic text version of Genesis 22 verse 2 and Jubilees 18 verse 1 is the name of the land where Yahweh had told Abraham to go perform the sacrifice. The Masoretic text tells us he traveled to the land of Moriah. Jubilees refers to it as the high country. The Greek Septuagint version of Genesis 22 verse 2 translates it as, "And he said, Take your son, the beloved one, whom you have loved, Isaac, and go into the high country, and offer him there for a whole burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you of." The high country and the land of Moriah seem to be a synonymous setting. As a matter of fact, we see the mention of Moriah once again in both Masoretic and Septuagint versions of the following passage. 2 Chronicles 3 verse 1 says, "Then Solomon began to build the house of Yahweh in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where Yahweh had appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite." Not only is Abraham sent to the geographical area of what would later be called Jerusalem, but Yahweh may have told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah, the very mountain where Solomon built the house of God. Again, this is just speculation, but Abraham was told to offer Isaac on one of the mountains that he would show him. It truly wouldn't surprise me if Abraham climbed the exact same mountain where God's future temple would be built. There's also a well-known theory that the mountain that God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on was Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. The problem is, Golgotha is considered to be more of a hill than a mountain, and is situated outside of the confines of Jerusalem. While there certainly are foreshadows between Isaac and Yeshua, the main takeaway of this video is that Abraham was going to offer his son Isaac on the same day that Christ offered up his own life, on the 15th of month 1. There's even greater significance as we continue reading about this event in Jubilees. But first, let's jump back to Genesis 22. As we all know, just as Abraham was about to obediently act on his faith in Yahweh, the following took place. "And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of Yahweh called to him from heaven and said, 'Abraham, Abraham.' And he said, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Do not stretch out your hand against the boy, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only one, from me.' Then Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there was a ram after it had been caught in the thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place, Yahweh will provide. As it is said this day, in the mount of Yahweh it will be provided." After Abraham and Isaac descend the mountain to meet up with the servants that Abraham brought with them on their journey, we read in Jubilees chapter 18 verses 17 to 19, "And Abraham went to his young men, and they arose, and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt by the well of the oath. And he celebrated this festival every year, 7 days with joy. And he called it the festival of the Lord, according to the 7 days during which he went and returned in peace. And accordingly has it been ordained and written on the heavenly tablets regarding Israel and its seed, that they should observe this festival 7 days with the joy of festival." Just as the calendrical timeline of events adds up, we can reaffirm this truth that the 7-day festival of the Lord that Abraham celebrated on the 15th day of this particular testing period was indeed the start of the 7-day feast that would later be referred to as the Feast of Unleavened Bread at the juncture of Israel's exodus out of Egypt. There are a couple more points I'd like to make before concluding this brief video. 1. Yahweh never requires that a human life should be sacrificed, nor does he accept a human sacrifice as an offering in any way. Allowing this would actually go against some of the instructions contained within his own eternal law. This may be material for another video, but Abraham already knew all of this because of his own priestly role that he played out for a large portion of his life. And he knew that even if he went through with what was asked of him, Isaac would have been raised back to life because of the promise of the covenant being available through his seed. Hebrews 11:17-19 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only son, to whom it was said, 'In Isaac your seed shall be called.' He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he also received him back." Number 2. Abraham's heart had already been tested several times before this final trial, and Yahweh knew that he would pass this Satan-inspired test. Even through all the amazing messianic foreshadowing, which is a justifiably sufficient reason to allow for such a test to transpire to begin with, Yahweh wanted to make a jab at his adversary to prove a point. You can't mess with his faithful ones. After Abraham successfully passes his test, Jubilees 18 verse 12 says, "And the prince Mastema was put to shame." Satan has always had a hate-on for God's faithful ones. He even thought that killing Yeshua several hundred years later, on the same day that Abraham was willing to offer his own son, Isaac, was going to solve his problems. But just as Abraham figuratively received his son back from the dead, Yahweh literally raised his own son from the dead. And Satan will ultimately feel that blow when he is finally judged for good in days ahead. If you stuck around until the end, I'd like to thank you for watching. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my ministry supporters. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and share it with your family and friends on your socials. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already done so. Peace and blessings.